Hello folks, welcome back. Today I want to talk about a recent trip I made to Austria and Germany. I wanted to go to some of the places associated with Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich and get a different perspective on things because I've been very interested lately in who Hitler really was and what his real mission was and all that. And anybody who follows my BitChute channel or any of my other Terrarium Firma stuff will know that I've done a few videos now about the Third Reich. I did this one recently, Hitler's Freudian Slip, where Hitler is clearly shown doing the Bolshevik salute. And then he nervously looks away when he realizes the camera was on him when he did it. I'm pretty sure that Hitler we know he was definitely a Freemason because he's doing all the Freemason handshakes. We know that Goering, Rommel were also Freemasons because we can see them doing their Masonic gestures. I've done a video about that too. This one here, Masonic gestures and handshakes of the Third Reich. But what really bothers me is that Hitler, he'd never had a job in his whole life. He had no expertise, no training in anything. He hadn't got a trade, he hadn't got a profession. And he just came out of nowhere and started running the country, right? Got the top job in the country. Like a lot of these politicians, I mean, look at Boris Johnson. He's never had a job in his life. And he just ended up running the country as well. And these guys come out and they say all the right things. And yet they end up destroying the country, getting it into a lot of debt. They come along, they say, we're going to save the country, we're going to be the hero of the country. They end up getting a lot of people killed. I mean, Hitler said he was going to save Germany from Bolshevik invasion, and they hadn't actually invaded Germany at all. They'd taken over Poland, but they hadn't invaded Germany. And by the end of the war, they got half of Germany. And Boris Johnson said he was going to save the country from coronavirus, and he got everybody to take these shots, which cost about £500 a shot, these vaccines. And he got like 4 boosters or 4 vaccines for every man, woman and child in the country, like 70 million people. So increased the national debt by trillions probably. And ended up getting a lot of people killed from these vaccinations. So these heroes, they come along, they have a lot of this fine talk, this rhetoric, and they end up doing the very thing they supposedly weren't there to prevent happening in the first place. So while I was in Austria, I watched a documentary in German. It was on Netflix called Hitler: A Career, and this was just a compilation of footage from the era. And it was a brilliant documentary. It was made in the 70s, I think. And it's just brilliant just to examine the footage because this is undeniable. A lot of people, they can argue this and argue that, but you can't argue with the pictures. If Hitler's doing a Bolshevik salute, then that's what it is, right? If he's doing a Masonic handshake, that's what it is. These things are undeniable. So, have you heard of the Chat GPT? OpenAI, and you can ask it any questions and it'll give you a sensible answer. Supposedly it can write an essay for you. People supposedly use it to cheat with their homework and things like that. I know somebody who gets it to write code for it, for very complicated computations. Well, I asked it a few questions about Lenin, and I wanted to see if there was any connection between Lenin and Munich, where the National Socialists had their headquarters. See if Lenin had any connection with Erich Ludendorff. Ludendorff, who was basically Hitler's handler, because I wanted to see if Adolf Hitler, who was supposedly the deadly enemy of the Bolsheviks, and Lenin, who was the leader of the Bolsheviks, had actually been groomed by the same people and educated and trained in the same place by the same people, if there was any connections. And it told me, it said that Lenin had lived in Munich for a short period of time during World War I. It says here, in April 1916, he was living in Switzerland, but the Swiss authorities forced him to leave the country because of his anti-war activities. I mean, this is Switzerland, right? Supposedly a neutral country. They're supposed to be anti-war. Lenin then travelled to Germany, which was fighting against Russia in the war, and was given permission by the German government to cross through Germany to reach Russia. However, Lenin was not allowed to enter Russia directly because he was considered a political threat to the Russian government. Okay, so this is Germany, supposedly at war with the Russian government, saying this. Instead, the German authorities arranged for him to be transported in a sealed train through Germany and across the Baltic Sea to Sweden, where he boarded a ferry to Finland. During his journey, Lenin made a stopover in Munich, where the headquarters of the National Socialist Party would be, Bavaria, the Bavarian Illuminati, where he gave a speech to a group of socialist activists. This is also where Hitler was radicalized, in Munich. And it was in the Hofbrauhaus, the famous beer hall in Munich, where Hitler gave his first speech, and they had these meetings of the National Socialist Party. But did you know also that Lenin was also amongst its regular customers? So this place in Munich, these two, the thesis and the antithesis, the National Socialists led by Hitler and the Bolsheviks led by Lenin, have this connection with the same place, the same pub in Munich. This speech, which later became known as the April Theses, outlined Lenin's vision for a socialist revolution in Russia and called for an end to the war. After spending several months in Finland, Lenin returned to Russia in April 1917 and played a key role in the Bolshevik Revolution later that year, which brought the Communist Party to power. Now we know that Erich Ludendorff was a supporter of Hitler, a sort of mentor, and I wanted to know if this Ludendorff was also Lenin's mentor and handler, perhaps, So I said, did Ludendorff and Lenin ever meet? This is the question I asked the AI chat. And it said, yes, Erich Ludendorff and Vladimir Lenin met during the early stages of the Russian Revolution in 1917. At the time, Ludendorff was a prominent German general who served as the chief of staff of the German army during World War I, and Lenin was the leader of the Bolshevik Party, which seized power in Russia during the October Revolution. In early 1918, Ludendorff ordered, a group of officers to travel to Russia to negotiate a peace treaty with the new Bolshevik government. The delegation included, and I do apologize, I messed it up when I did the screen capture on these, one who was fluent in Russian, Nikolai. Nikolai arranged a meeting between Ludendorff and Lenin in the Kremlin in March 1918. So it says they met in Munich, and it also says now that they met in the Kremlin. According to Nikolai's account, Ludendorff and Lenin had a cordial conversation in which they discussed the terms of the proposed peace treaty. Lenin reportedly expressed his desire for a quick end to the war and offered concessions to the Germans in exchange for a favorable treaty. Ludendorff, in return, offered to support the Bolsheviks in their struggle against the anti-communist forces that were operating in Russia at the time. The meeting between Ludendorff and Lenin was a significant event in the history of the Russian Revolution and the First World War. It demonstrated the complex web of alliances and negotiations that were taking place between the various factions that were involved in the war, and it highlighted the strategic importance of Russia as a key player in the conflict. Okay, I thought this was very interesting, right? So I asked it again today. Same question. Did Ludendorff and Lenin ever meet? And then it gave me a completely different answer. There is no historical evidence to suggest that Erich Ludendorff and Vladimir Lenin ever met in person. Ludendorff was a German general during World War I and a prominent figure, blah, blah, blah. Although both Ludendorff and Lenin played significant roles in the events of World War I and the Russian Revolution, their paths never seem to have crossed in person. It is possible that they may have corresponded indirectly, as both were influential figures during a tumultuous period in world history. However, there is no record of any direct communications or meetings between them, so this is in direct contradiction to what the AI told me before. So what does that say about this AI chat thing? But still, I was interested in the relationship between Lenin, Munich, Ludendorff, and Hitler. So I wanted to know if Hitler and Lenin were in Munich at the same time, and therefore could possibly have met and known each other. When I asked it what was Hitler doing in 1916, Adolf Hitler was a soldier serving in the German army during World War I. He had volunteered for military service, blah blah blah, and was deployed to the Western Front. In 1916, Hitler was serving as a messenger on the Western Front. During this time, he was wounded twice and awarded the Iron Cross for bravery. In October 1916, this is what the AI chat says, he was transferred to the Eastern Front, where he served as a dispatch runner during the Battle of the Somme, which I thought was on the Western Front, but never mind. He was later transferred to regimental headquarters, where he worked as a clerk. Hitler's experience as a soldier during World War I had a profound impact on his life and worldview. He used his experiences to justify his political beliefs, including his militarism and hatred of Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's defeat in the war. He blamed his hatred of the Jews blamed them for Germany's defeat. Now here's the thing. Hitler said that the Jews were behind Bolshevism. And we got Erich Ludendorff, Hitler's handler, supporting the Bolsheviks in World War I, and Germany supporting the Bolsheviks. Okay, now another important thing we have to discuss at this stage of the presentation is the relationship between the Bavarians and the Austrians. We've got to address this issue that Adolf Hitler supposedly was the leader of an ultra-nationalist German government, and yet Adolf Hitler was a foreigner, he was Austrian. So what's with that, right? Well, I want to explain. Now this is what I never really appreciated until this recent trip, but I got some people to explain it to me, some Austrians explained it to me. I was in the Hofbrauhaus, and I met up with some people from Austria, and so I was in Munich, right? And I met up with some Austrians in there, and they were saying that the Austrians and the Bavarians speak the same dialect of German. And he said that actually the Austrians, we speak what is called Bavarian German. He said that even our accent, you can't tell. He says that the barmaid that was serving us, he said she doesn't know that I'm a foreigner, because we Austrians have the same accent as people from this part of Germany. He said that the German girls and the Bavarian girls and the Austrian girls wear this dirndl, and the men wear the lederhosen, this traditional costume. Even their traditional costume, their material culture is identical. So their language, their dialect, their accent, identical. So we think of Hitler being this foreigner because he's from Austria, but he didn't even have a foreign accent because, remember, it was the Bavarian connection in Munich. This is where the National Socialists had their headquarters. They were ethnically identical, pretty much, part of the ethnic continuum with the Austrians. And in fact, one Austrian man told me, he said that we and the Bavarians refer to the other Germans as Prussians. Okay, what you're looking at now is the Austrian coat of arms. I want you to notice something. The hammer and the sickle and the broken chains. Now you probably think that, quite rightly, that this is a symbol of Soviet communism. But actually, here it is in the Austrian coat of arms. So, how come? Because, as far as I know, Austria was never part of the Soviet Union. Or was it? We have the Bavarian Illuminati, Ludendorff, supporting the Bolsheviks in World War I. We have the Austrian coat of arms with a hammer and sickle. Right, now this hammer and sickle was originally a sword and a scepter during the time of the Austrian Empire. But in 1919 they changed the coat of arms and they replaced it with a hammer and a sickle. This is after the First World War, after the Bolsheviks had taken over Russia. And this is because Austria became a republic. And they got rid of their monarchy and they dismantled the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So you got the Bolsheviks trying to get rid of the monarchy in Russia and establish a republic, right? So Soviet Socialist Republic. And at the same time, during this war, the First World War, as soon as it's over, Austria's got rid of its empire and its monarchy, and they've got the hammer and sickle too. And there's this broken chain. Now, this broken chain was introduced in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. By that time, Germany got rid of its monarchy. And this chain, anybody who knows about Karl Marx, this chain represents the Communist Manifesto, where it says the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. So I asked the AI about the hammer and sickle emblem, because I was in Austria, I was asking everybody, why is the hammer and sickle in their coat of arms? And they were all saying, oh, it's nothing to do with communism, nothing to do with it at all. No, totally unrelated. It's an old symbol, we've always had it. Well, they haven't. The hammer and sickle emblem was designed by two Russian artists, Vladimir Lenin and Anna Yaroslavna, in 1917, 2 years before it was incorporated into the Austrian coat of arms, during the early days of the Russian Revolution. Lenin, who was the leader of the Bolshevik Party and the first head of the Soviet government, came up with the idea of combining the two symbols to represent the unity of workers and peasants in the communist movement. The hammer represented the industrial workers, while the sickle represented the agricultural workers, and that's what the Austrians told me. Okay, so it was Lenin and this Anna Yaroslavna who came up with it. The hammer and sickle emblem became the most recognizable symbol of the Soviet Union and was featured on the national flag, the coat of arms, and numerous other emblems and symbols of the Soviet government and Communist Party. So it's definitely Soviet Communist, and it was Lenin who helped come up with it, the guy that Ludendorff supported. Ludendorff, Hitler's handler, and who'd met Lenin, according to this AI chat, and had a very cordial relationship with him and supported him. Now, I asked the AI chat about the coat of arms, and does it feature, the hammer and sickle, and does it feature in the Austrian coat of arms? And it said this: the Austrian coat of arms does not feature a hammer and sickle. Well, we've just seen it, haven't we? With the broken chain. It's a well-established fact that it does feature. But it says it doesn't. It says the hammer and sickle was the emblem of the former Soviet Union and is associated with communism. Austria is a federal parliamentary republic with a democratic system of government and does not have any association with communism. The current coat of arms of Austria features a black eagle with a golden beak and claws on a red shield, okay, with a white border. The eagle is holding a hammer in one claw and a sickle in the other. But this is a historic symbol that dates back to the Holy Roman Empire and is not related to communism. Well, that's not true. This was introduced into the coat of arms in 1919. So this AI chat is misleading us, and I would venture to guess that probably it's because it just reads the internet and absorbs all the lies and propaganda of there, and that's where its intelligence comes from. Okay, so we've covered quite a lot. Let's kind of summarize where we've got to so far with this. Lenin and Hitler both started their political careers, or had significant beginnings, let's say, in Munich. They were both even connected with the same place, this beer house, which today, the Hofbrauhaus, which today is still actually used as a kind of place for political radical groups. Lenin was making speeches. There's a definite connection. Lenin had a very cordial relationship with Ludendorff, and Hitler did too. Lenin led a socialist revolution in Russia. Hitler led a socialist government in Germany. The Bavarians and the Austrians, Hitler being an Austrian, the Bavarians and the Austrians are ethnically very, very similar. They're part of an ethnic continuum. Russia and Austria both got rid of their monarchies and established kind of republic-style governments in the First World War, and Germany got rid of its monarchy as well, pretty much simultaneous. And it was all done under Lenin and Hitler. And the hammer and sickle was incorporated into the Austrian coat of arms in 1919, immediately after the First World War. And it's possible Lenin and Hitler were in Munich at the same time. Now, I read a couple of books while I was in Austria. One called Inside the Third Reich by Albert Speer. And Albert Speer said a number of interesting things that really stood out to me, because he was very close to Hitler. He considered himself, he said that Hitler had no friends, but if anybody came close to being his friend, it was him, Albert Speer. And he knew Hitler a long time and was pretty close to him, worked closely with him. And Albert Speer said that towards the end of the war, Hitler said to him he decided that when they conquered Russia, he wanted to install Stalin as the governor of Russia. So when the Germans defeated Russia, as Hitler intended, he wanted to put Stalin in charge of Russia. Hitler said that to Speer, which surprised Speer, because he thought they were deadly enemies. But he said no, Hitler really admired Stalin, and actually Hitler saw Stalin as a kind of colleague. A colleague. That's a strange thing to say, isn't it? It struck Albert Speer as being very strange. Another book that I read while I was in Austria was by Reinhard Gehlen, who was head of German intelligence for the Wehrmacht Foreign Armies East during the Second World War. And Reinhard Gehlen said in his memoirs, he said that the intelligence service knew that there was a spy high up in the German government, in the cabinet, close to Hitler. And this spy, they gave the nickname Werther. And they said that this guy was transmitting radio signals to Moscow. They were monitoring these signals, but they couldn't identify who it was during the war at the time. He said after the war, he came to the conclusion that it was Martin Bormann. That's what Reinhard Gehlen said. Reinhard Gehlen said it was Martin Bormann. Now, Martin Bormann was very, very close to Hitler, and he basically controlled all access to Hitler. If you wanted to have a meeting with Hitler, you had to go through Bormann and get his approval. At the end of the war, Bormann disappeared, and been a lot of speculation about where he fled to, where he got to. It looks like he was actually smuggled out of Germany and retired in Russia. That's the reality of it, of what happened to Martin Bormann. He was a Russian spy. Everybody thinks they've got to look west to South America for Martin Bormann. I'm telling you, he wasn't west. You should look east. That's where he went. So it's classic misdirection. I would also suggest that you look east for what really happened to Joseph Goebbels and his family, and what really happened to Hitler and Eva Braun, because I believe they were all Soviet agents, and they were all taken to Russia to safety, to retire there in nice country houses on nice pensions in the Soviet Union. Now, another reason that I think Hitler was probably taken to Russia was because it's Russian intelligence that is now supplying this so-called evidence, physical evidence, a skull fragment which is now on display in Russia somewhere in a museum. There we go, Adolf Hitler's skull on show. All this dodgy evidence, complete nonsense. Here's this skull now. Now, Hitler was supposedly doused in petrol and set on fire. And the fire must have been so intense that it only left this little fragment of the skull. So it was hot enough to consume bone. And it left a little tiny fragment of skull which had this hole in it, which is the bullet hole from the gun. There's the gun, presumably, where Hitler shot himself through the head. Now, they also say that Hitler's teeth were discovered. He only had 5 actual teeth left, and the rest of it was all bridge work. The problem with that is that if he was burnt with petrol, and the petrol was hot enough to destroy bone, which it would never have got that hot, but let's say it was hot enough to destroy the body so it was unrecognizable. The bridge work, which was made of mercury amalgam bridge work, that would have melted. Amalgam phases have very low melting temperatures, about 80 degrees C. It's talking here about dental amalgam. Not even as hot as boiling water. So you wouldn't have been able to identify Hitler from his dental work because it would have melted at only 80 degrees centigrade. This skull fragment here is completely fake, and this is being put about by the Russians. The Russians are behind the cover-up of what happened to Hitler. And right up to the present day, right up to the minute, let's go to notifications. Let's see what's come up in my notifications on BitChute. And it says here, new video, New Lies for Old, The Orchestrated Collapse of Communism, parts 1 and 2. So this is Anatoly Golitsyn's work, isn't it, from the 1980s? The perestroika deception and all that. So let's click on these videos and see what it says. The parent channel of this video is unavailable at your location due to the following restrictions. Contains incitement to hatred. So this has been censored by BitChute. Soviet-style, communist-style, Bolshevik-style censorship. Now, we're supposed to be hating on Russia now because in the news they're saying about all the Russian atrocities in Ukraine and how they're being mean to Ukraine, the Russians. We're supposed to hate them. And yet, BitChute here is censoring information critical of Russia for the reason that the Russia of today, the post-communist Russia, is actually Bolshevik communist Russia in disguise. So this is real information, not like the rubbish you see on TV. And this is what's censored. This is how you know that there's something to it. I think everything I've shown in this video points to one thing, one firm conclusion we can draw, is that the Soviet Union, the communists, won the Second World War. And we've been living under communism for 80 years now. But they were clever enough not to tell us about it. Because if you don't know something's wrong, you can't do anything about it.